I mean, it's a conversation at the end of the day, shifting the conversation around the South African cricket team and that narrative that exists.
These type of conversations are happening in casual commentary at braais at home with people that are just watching the game and those sort of things. And we're wanting to do nothing different than having that same sort of conversation, perhaps just lift the lid somewhat, lift the caliber of the conversation, because we've already peeked behind the curtains or under the covers, if you want to use that term, right?
As soon as you get clear on your motivations and your purpose and your intention, a lot of things can start falling into place.
Yeah.
A lot of things become automated. A lot of things all of a sudden goes, oh, okay, cool, that's how I'm going to do it. So the hows become very clear when the whys are clear.
These guys are hopeful that they're winners. They're not seeing themselves as winners entering it. Despite their having illustrious careers, it's a matter of coming together under the Proteas brand is where things come unstuck in a way.
So the identities of our local cricketing ecosystem has been completely eradicated at a provincial level. There is no longer that sort of, oh, I want to play for this team. Yeah.
It's like taking someone that's not familiar or not comfortable or used to being free and not shown how to handle that freedom. It's the same sort of analogy when we start talking about a playing philosophy of playing with freedom.
All exciting stuff that we're going to get into, right? All exciting stuff that we're going to get into. I'm already like salivating a little bit. Right, Russell. I'm excited for this chat, right? Because we wanted to, I think, record sort of after every Super 8 game, but due to some movements of my own and things have been a little bit hectic, we weren't able to. Plus, we were, I think, sort of sitting back and saying, well, let's just see what actually happens with the team, you know, and how they get on. And it certainly seems like the first half of the tournament where they've sort of pushed and come up against this resistance of close wins. And they kept on saying at the time, and it was sort of, I was sort of apprehensive about it, sitting back and thinking, okay, cool, I hear you, but like, let's see how it plays out, right? And it seems like it's the truth, right? That they really took the confidence from those close games. And I'm actually wondering, is this the new South African way? It's not a resilience, because resilience says your back is against the wall almost like completely. You've lost and you've got to stand up and show yourself, where it's almost like saying that even if things are tough, we can still end up on top. And I don't know if that's resilience. I think it's something different. I don't know what the word for that would be, but I'm wondering what your sort of take is on the weekend and the last couple of games, and maybe what are some of the things you've noticed. But certainly I've had this awareness for myself that as much as I thought the team looked flat at the start, whatever's been going on behind the scenes there, it seems like they've turned the corner, right? It seems like they're hitting their straps. Is it too early? We don't know yet. But it certainly seems like they're sort of in a good space, you know, for whatever reason that might be.
Yeah, certainly. I think I echo your similar sentiments on the fact that something has changed and has changed dramatically in terms of the results is also showing that. I think they look a little bit more switched on, to be honest. Even the cricket skills are coming through. There's some majorly good experiences, skill-wise and stuff that's happened. Particularly in the field, they've definitely come and rallied together, you know, and found a way to be energized and support one another. So the whole teaming aspect seems to be coming together quite nicely, as opposed to depending on individual brilliance and things like that, which we echoed before. So I do see a lot of that, but as I said, particularly in the field, they're kind of supporting one another. And I think it was even echoed in some of the post-match presentations where, you know, the guys are alluding to the fact that anyone can rise up on the day and do that. So, and they're not looking to the main stars to do it necessarily, even though Quinton obviously won the game from against England in terms of his aptitude of and recognizing the conditions and playing accordingly. You know, the one thing that I think is the biggest accomplishment as this team evolved through this tournament, I would even want to go as saying boldly that one big accomplishment that's already accomplished as they're going into the semi-final now, I feel that they've untagged themselves. the Chokers tag has to be put to bed. I think that that's a major accomplishment. If Rob Walter had a mandate to go into this tournament to necessarily bring the cup home, the first prize he should actually be, crediting himself for is the fact that they've scrapped through this tournament and untagged it, because all the games they kind of got over the line, despite the fact that most other occasions they would have been choking. So I think that the tag should be dismantled through this 7 victories expression. And that's one positive thing that I think has come as a result of it. That's how I perceive it. And I would even venture to say that we should stop even referring to the tag as a big thing. That's one positive thing, but the consequences of that, it throws us into a conundrum in a way, right? If you don't longer have this tag, so what's next? What's the next challenge, really? And obviously they're still in the tournament, they're still in the campaign for the cup. So what is that now? But if you no longer have to not resist, but kind of play with this monkey on your back, it's no longer an obstacle. What are you now liberated to face up against? So this is for me the positive. They've untagged themselves, but now what is it that we can recognize as the next challenge that gets them moving forward?
Yeah, I agree. I think that as you sort of said that, I'm like, ooh, it's big words, right? We're not out the tournament yet. We haven't won it yet. We're not out the other side yet. But I certainly share the sentiment that I can imagine that teams in the past with so many close games would have faltered somewhere. And at the start of the tournament, I think I mentioned this in one of our conversations, like I almost get the sense that they've got to play the perfect World Cup. Now, this World Cup certainly hasn't been perfect by a long stretch. There's been many, many, many occasions where you thought, geez, we should have smashed this team, or we should have, I think we even spoke about them not winning a game by 50 runs or like completely dominating, and sort of just focusing on the win. Maybe the win was important, right? I think just before we started recording, you and I spoke a little bit about the weightedness of too much meaning. And maybe then just focusing on sort of the cricket element and saying, okay, cool. Let's just do the cricket right. We've always known, and I suppose with every World Cup, we always say, oh, we have the most talented cricketers in the world. Why can't we do this? We have some of the best players in the world. We've had world number ones. We've had test rankings. We've had ODI rankings, being the number 1 team in the world. Yet we can't win anything. And so I think there's this, and maybe it's because we wanted to do the rugby thing. Maybe it's because we wanted to bring the nation together. The thing is, you can't bring the nation together if you're not winning. Like, I don't think you can have that high of an impact. And so I don't know if it was a conscious thing. Certainly sounds like it was a conscious thing, right? Like from the get-go, they spoke about winning. They're here to lift the trophy. And maybe it's like speaking those words into existence more, not making the win something to be feared, but more something like it's like our destiny. If that's sort of how they're using the words, I think we spoke a little bit about that in another conversation. If that's how they're using the words, and if that's the sort of sense that it creates, then I can certainly see how they get to this place where, we're not carrying the weight of trying to change the nation, because it does come across in the team talks. They talk about backing each other. They talk about anyone on the day. I think it was Shamsi in the last presser sort of thing that we got, that alludes to that quite a lot. And if I remember Australian teams of the past, definitely that's a very similar language to what they would speak. Like it wasn't on Ricky Ponting to score all the runs. It was because they had Hayden, Langer, one of us will. And if it's your day, it's your day, and we celebrate that. And so that's a very similar language, right? Not relying just on one person, and saying, well, if it's your day, and if it's not your day, not the end of the world, we're back here to play the next game still. So you get as a cricketer, you get a little bit of a safety net. You get a feeling of like, it's not all on one performance. I have to perform in this game, otherwise I'm out the team. And so I certainly can see that can lead to a level of freedom for players to sort of go and express themselves, Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, just to kind of reiterate what you're just saying there, I'm wondering if the choker's tag, like a lot of people presume that the only way we're going to get rid of this tag, and just to recap what you said,
Mm,
is to actually win the cup, is actually to get the victory. But I think in this case, as it unfolds, I don't think we need that end goal. And I know you're saying we still have a semi-final and a final, right? But I think there's enough evidence that suggests that, like you said, in all other bilateral series, whether we're playing Test cricket, whether we're playing one-day cricket, there's enough evidences that yes, we make falter and fall short, and our standard of play is maybe subpar for most part, depending on the position we play against. But I do see now that we have more of a resolve and a resilience, or not to use that word too much, but we do kind of get to accomplish the match win as well as showing that deeper character, right? So I'm thinking that, if we're talking about character in that regard, in that way, they have definitely found a way to come together as a unit and combat it and let go and untag themselves. So if
mm,
we can acknowledge that, then perhaps we can progress, right, towards something that's a little bit further. And just what you spoke about there, the kind of the weightiness of, or the heaviness of putting extra burden of playing for a bigger cause other than the cricket match. I'm not sure if that is something, as I'm saying, I was grappling with this concept. If it's something that should be placed on these professional cricketers, they are representative of us or representing us all there, right? They are a national side. So they should be playing for a grander cause, right? For a deeper cause. But it seems like they've intentionally parked that cause whilst they're focusing on the cricket skills, match to match, right? Day to day, in a sense, and almost half insulated themselves, right? But the insulation is obviously a ploy to get the performance out. Now, the fine line is not to isolate yourself, to have almost like an exclusive boys' club in a sense. Now, I'm not trying to be over analytical here, but don't disconnect yourself so far from kind of the reality, because it is a matter of trying to accomplish something for others, right? Because you're not there just representing yourself. So this is where the conundrum for me comes from is it a matter of just purely the cricket wins for the sake, and we celebrate the fact that we've untagged, which I think is the first accomplishment here, and then keep progressing towards seeing if we can go all the way with another two more games, right? But now that cup, if it were to come our way, right, what does that actually mean? Is it an empty cup, i.e., another win, which is going to be 9 wins in total, straight, and breaking a record, because I think no team has been unbeaten going from start to finish in a tournament and winning it. Or is there something then afterwards more weighty that builds the nation, so to speak, as you spoke about? Is Markram a statesman, i.e., like a Siya Kolisi in rugby? Does he actually kind of amalgamate the nation? And there is also, I mean, there's question marks around whether that is actually a reality. Does sport create unity? You know what I mean? So those are some of the questions, because one thing we cannot disregard is, and we spoke about this before, we don't have to rehash it, but Cricket South Africa, basically, when they appointed and liberated Rob Walter and his selections, right? They liberated and said, choose your best team, take whatever you want. In that regard, they basically said, we want you to bring back victory, or untag, get rid of the chokers tag and get victory. Victory is our number one priority, right? And we are sacrificing whatever else in the process, but that is what we want accomplished. And we'll deal with whatever's next, So for me, if that's the mandate and the instruction that he was given to go, so far so good. He's got the accomplishment. And we need to be wary of when this cup comes back, what does it actually handle? What does it have within it? What does it do for us? And this is something that we seriously, as a system, need to consider between, the CEO, the director, whoever else is making these major decisions. What does that cup actually represent? It has to have a particular context to it. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting with just shallow victories. And it kind of does like, oh,
mm,
thanks, we won today. Next week, we forget about who won and whatever.
mm, mm. As you're speaking there, I'm reminded of that idea of you can't pour from an empty cup. And
Yeah.
maybe that's where cricket had it wrong. Maybe if this was the focus a little bit sooner. So maybe in trying to copy rugby from a nation building point of view was not the right approach. too much weightedness, too much on the shoulders. Maybe we need the win first, right? Have that in the cup, so to say. Have the cup in the cup so that you've got something to pour from. So it will be interesting to see what CSA then does with that, right? If there is a win, and I mean, there's still a couple of games to go. Certainly South Africa look like a team at this point in time. You know, now that the sort of you're getting to the back end and it's strength versus strength essentially. I echo your sentiments in terms of fielding. They certainly look like there's not another team fielding like that at this point in time, right? And that's normally a good indication of where a team is at, I think, is what their fielding standards are and how they move on the field. And the sort of the things that they do. Yesterday I was involved in a game, and the team I'm sort of with, they catch really well, and we were under the pump, and all of a sudden we drop 8-9 catches, you know. And so I think it is an indication. If you think of the Australian team, they dropped 6 catches the other night, you know, and they said it's uncharacteristic of an Australian team. What do they do the next game? They lose to Bangladesh, Afghanistan, right? And so I think there's something to be said about that, right? Fielding is the only real team thing that happens in cricket. Batting and bowling can be seen as sort of individual. You can do things as an individual. And so there's certainly a lot that I think we can see and take from that. I don't know if there's another team in this World Cup that actually gives me that sense. Really, you know, I don't know if there is, and that might be a good thing or a bad thing, right? It might show that that's why they potentially can win this thing, is because they're in this space, right? And maybe we didn't see it before, but it's very obvious, I think, at this point in time. And so my hope is that it continues for the sake of South Africa, you know, for the sake of these cricketers that work really hard and, you know, they want this. I'm wondering what the spill-off of it's going to be, right? Is the spill-off going to be potentially something like, oh, it's only the T20 World Cup, you know, like it's not as important as the 50-over World Cup, even though T20 cricket is trumping 50-over cricket all around the world. So it's like, you know, everybody knows in T20 cricket, anybody can win. So now you've just won that, you know, where 50-over cricket is more serious and but England went T20 World Cup first, then 50-over World Cup, right? So I'm wondering what the effect will be. Will the floodgates open or won't it? Will it sort of stagnate a little bit? And I think a lot of that will depend on what CSA does with it and how they approach it. And who knows, you know, maybe we'll see some characters of these cricketers, just to sort of latch onto the point around the statesman. Maybe we'll see some of these character traits of these cricketers sort of come to the fore, you know. Who knows what sits in a Markram? He seems a sort of more quiet, behind the scenes, humble character. I've never really met him or spoken with him a lot, so I can't say with 100% certainty. But that's sort of how he comes across and how other people would speak about him. What does that mean? You know, do we need more of that in our own country? If we think in our chats we've spoken about government, you know, is that not what we more need in government? People that are humble and maybe just focuses on the right things at the right time. You know, if right now it's about the cricket, let's focus on the cricket. Maybe that's what we need. So there could be an element of maybe not the stand on the back of a bus and cheer and have huge inspirational words, but maybe in terms of character and what just happens behind closed doors, maybe we definitely need more of that type of leader in our country rather than the one that just is self-serving behind closed doors and wheels and deals under the table, you know.
Yeah, there was definitely impression that Markram in his post-match, you know, interviews and presentations consistently, that he's growing in the sense of maturity, and in the way he's speaking. You know, the sense of vulnerability, the transparency. I think his language is very mature. The only kind of criticism I may have of him, as you just rightfully saying now, that he's speaking mostly cricket or just purely cricket, right? And not much alluding to the fact that who they're playing for and for what reasoning. So I think he's keeping the basics, and focusing what's in front of him. And maybe that is the trick for them. because the variables in cricket are so diverse anyway. So you may as well just isolate it in terms of that for now, right? And then whatever success may come, let it not be a soulless success. Let that success actually translate to other people. So, for instance, the game, therefore, your performance is not polarizing people. It's not separating and creating bigger gaps and divides, but actually bringing people together, amalgamating or unifying people. Perhaps that's their way of doing it. There's a lot of history and a lot of backdrop, and I think the weight of that might be too much for these, call it simple cricketers, professional cricketers. So their performance needs to stand on its own, and then whatever we can do with that performance, maybe we can enhance our principled stances, our statesmanship, what we can actually get accomplished, because there was definitely question marks, and we did it ourselves in a way. I did it intentionally as well. With Rob being appointed in a way, being brought in to kind of just inspire and unite. I felt like in the process of just keeping it cricket related, Rob was actually robbing us, cheating us of a deeper kind of sense of victory. But I think maybe they have to just get the cricket things done, and then we can work on whatever form of character development, enhancement of the game that might be. But that would have to take not just the cricketers solely, because I think it's unfair to place that burden on them. They already have the burden of just performing their skills on the day and representing us well. So we need to be able to take these wins and make these wins bigger for us as a nation, right? And we can all contribute towards that. But there needs to be an avenue where what people were saying, be careful what you wish for. We're now going to go get the championship, hopefully, right? Can this mean a tightening on a more connectedness and a more of a contributive cohesion that's going to be felt throughout the system? If that's the case, then the performance will lead to more connectedness. It will lead towards more synergy. And essentially, that sense of belonging will be felt throughout the structures. And hopefully, that's what the silverware does, or at least this expression of winning 7 out of 7. Let it not be a soulless success. Let it be filled with a lot of soul, and let it allow us to actually find our way to each other. And that's the hope, from this whole thing.
I do wonder, like as you say that, right? And I know this conversation has been a little bit more upbeat, right? It's been a little bit more, okay, cool. We see some good things there, right? There's some good things happening. Freaking well done to the coaching staff and everybody else that's contributing to that. And who knows what galvanized them, right? It could be that there's some drama behind the scenes and they had to work their way through that as a team. Yeah. And quite often it is. I actually just read an article this morning of, I think, the 1999 World Cup team, Australia, and how much drama they had off the field with Steve Waugh making rules, putting a ban on alcohol, and sort of what that did with Shane Warne and the younger players in the team. And they weren't a happy bunch, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's in a conversation that sort of came out from us or if it was some other conversation, but I know you and I've spoken through this idea before, that sometimes teams almost like need a little bit of something to galvanize them. They need something to push them in a direction. And normally that's some conflict of some sort, or some fallout of some sort, or potentially some rift, but in spite of that, we find each other. And so who knows, right? Who knows? I don't know if they kumbaya their way through this and into this, or if there was some conflict behind the scenes that nobody just knows about, right? Easy to lift the covers, put things under there, keep everything nice and shut. We don't know, right? But clearly they found something, right? And so I had a point with all of that, and now it's disappeared out of my head. I'm sure it'll come back. Maybe just what I'm aware of that I want to just add on to that is, so it was sort of alluding to the meaningfulness of something, right? And so maybe they found their own meaning. So maybe they're not carrying the meaningfulness of the nation, of the, but clearly there's something visibly different there than earlier in the tournament. And so something happens, or they developed as they went, some meaningfulness within the team, right? So it's not to say, oh, well, there's no meaning whatsoever. We know meaning drives performance, right? And so surely they found some meaningfulness within the environment. And so I think the hope would be that whatever that is or was, that, and hey, maybe it's not something that can be shared, but that we shared the essence of that. I'm sure somebody will write the book. Or maybe there's a Netflix crew following them. Who knows, right? You have no idea with these things. And so hopefully that meaningfulness comes to light, and that like, what is it that really went down behind the scenes? Because I think if you think of like the selection dramas at the start, that this wasn't the most representative team we selected. And so I still think there could be potentially like a little bit of a fallout just on that, right? Which I think would have to be navigated. Maybe we'll just be more than happy to finally say, okay, cool, we want something, and we understand that you need to be really good to play for the Proteas. Done, right? And then if you're good enough, you get selected, and yes, we'll do our best to select a representative team, but ultimately winning feels good, right? It feels better than ticking some boxes, potentially, but we have to stay mindful of those things. And so maybe I'm talking in circles here a little bit. So the idea I think I wanted to just convey is there's a meaningfulness to that I think they found, and within, and I'm hoping that we can learn what that is, so that these other issues, right? And I think that's where my head sort of jumped into the other issues, so that these other issues can find their place within that, so that it's not just a case of, okay, we've won, but we've still got all these problems. Yes, we've won, and these are the reasons we've won. And this is almost like the standard and what you've got to aspire to as an individual to understand what winning takes. This is how we fielded. This is how we batted. This is how we bowled. This is the language that we created for ourselves. This is what we did behind the scenes. These are the conflicts we overcome. This is how we came together. And I think the more we can understand that mechanism and sort of filter that in, maybe that's the key to finding what it means to play South African cricket, what the brand is of South African cricket, that it can be the impetus to something like that. Then I feel like it's not soulless, right? It's we're taking something that we found this South African thing, and we're coming to share that, versus we found this, we're up on this pedestal, we won this trophy, like bring it to the people, like, and not just bring the cup to the people, bring the essence of what you did to the people, and let the people understand that, and we can learn to cultivate that, grow that from a younger age. Because I think from the get-go, that was sort of my thing, is that we're sitting in our living rooms and we're watching TV and we're talking about us as a big joker. So the next generation is just being taught those ideas. And so if we win this thing, I'd like to see that there's a concerted effort to unpack it, and sort of share that information more publicly, so that the conversation on the couch can change, so that the next 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old that will one day play for the Proteas learns from a young age what that means and what that is and how we got to do this thing.
So two things. Number one, for me, this balance thing you're speaking about, that's why I call it the balance of it all. If they're going to get success, the success has to translate towards others. So it's almost like bring that essence, like you're saying, bring it back, and let's kind of not copy paste it, but kind of share it and see how it can evolve with other people. Like bring the nation authentically together, if you want to call it that, right? And let it go into the different spheres, and let it be shared from a space of generosity, not from a space of elevation, like, kind of hierarchical elevation. So come down and share it with us and saying we've done it for us all. We can start building with these building blocks now, a nice platform for us all to go onto. So that's the balance. However, if you allow the egos to control, this is the disparity that we were seeing coming, in that if you're going to get the success, it looks like you're going to hold the success for yourself and allow the glow to shine your face, as opposed to all our faces in South Africa. And that was the danger. So if there's maturity, which it seems like it's coming from the markrooms, right? If there's maturity, then this needs to be transitioning into the greater South African cricket community, but also just the greater South African sporting community and society. And hopefully that's the case. So this kind of chasing the moon, I heard it once spoken about in socials, chasing the moon of this cup, right? If that's really the objective of where we went in with this, winning type of objective or mandate, remember now what happens is, if we get this accomplished, right, it would be like this kind of monkey on our back or kind of thing, this blind spot that's in the way that we can't progress. It's similar to the SA20, for instance. So the SA20 was everyone around the world has this money-making spin, money-making kind of competition that's kind of driving their sustainabilities and prosperity and all those sorts of things. Now we've got it. Now we need to be able to grow it and make sure that it's of high excellence and so forth, right? So we've got this thing. Now we can move on to maybe different things that are concerns within our backyard. So similarly, if we get this thing of a choker over the accomplished, right? We tick that box. We move on, even get the cup, the first ICC. Now we can shift onto the next big thing, which most likely would probably become the transformation. The fact that we send one Black African over in this World Cup, a merit team that won and done the business, right? But now we need to make sure that the next World Cup in 2027 is fully representative and be strongly focused because of the success. We can tick that box. We're done with it. Let's move on and not start talking about we need to allow everyone to be, capacitated and empowered through this whole experience. So that for me is what people may not realize is coming, is the fact that if this thing is already confirmed, as in we've got this thing sorted out, the next focus should be now. There's no excuses for not getting the transformation thing sorted out. And really, from a pure-hearted, a proper spirited approach, decentralize these previously power distances that we had with one another, the polarizing aspects, the subtle unconscious bias and all those sorts of things, dismantle all of that, flatten the whole system, and allow everyone to play their part. And in doing that, we will be able to be energized as opposed to being constantly crippled by this. Because believe it or not, this has been our kryptonite in a way. And it's weakened us consistently, knowing we have talented individual, but this kryptonite seems to have not have too much effect on us in this World Cup, and hopefully we can do it for 2 more and come back with a mission and a meaning of taking on all the other things that matter for us.
Yeah. I'm reminded of an idea. I had somebody on the podcast a while ago, and he sort of taught me this idea and concept of focusing on the right things at the right time. And so maybe in the World Cup, the right thing to do, as we've sort of spoken, is to focus on the cricket, right? And so beyond that, what would be the right thing at the right time? And I hear what you speak about the egos, right? And I'm very careful of that. My sense is that there would definitely be some individuals in the team that I know personally, not that I know all of them, right? But there's definitely some there that I don't think they'd make it about them. They're not flashy like that in any case, in everyday life, right?
Yeah.
My concern for that might lie with, maybe also not, right? The coaching staff, I don't feel like they're really that flashy, sort of put it out there kind of people as a generalization, you know? So you don't know, right? But that would be an interesting thing to maybe lift the covers on down the line, right? Like how did it all play out? What actually do we see happen, you know? And so there's the right thing at the right time. And so I think what happens beyond would need a bit of that too, right? If you're able to just go make it about the cricket, when you're done winning, what would be the important things for us to actually now go focus on with this win, you know? And I feel like we're speaking as if it's almost inevitable, and who knows, a lot can still happen, right? 2 games left. Anything could happen. My sense is it won't. I don't know why I have this underlying feeling more than ever before that you just see good things happening. Now, did they peak too early? But the problem for me is you don't see other teams peaking other than maybe India, you know, other than maybe India that's also putting performances together as a team, sort of everybody chipping in. They've got some skilled bowlers. They walking games, to be fair, right? They're chasing down big totals. They're setting big totals. So they're definitely not going to be a small hurdle. My sense would just be that somehow, I don't know who it is there or what it is, and maybe it's everything coming together nicely, whether it's their analyst that's got sort of helping them formulate good plans, if it's just like the cricketing stuff, right? Whether it's a Tom, whether he's working with the players or the coaches or whoever, sort of influencing the environment in positive and healthy ways that gets him to be together, whether it's Rob who's managing in his best way that environment in a way that makes it function optimally, even if from the outside it could look like it's not, not that it is. Maybe it's the bits and pieces of everybody, right? Like it's not a named coach where I'm this coach. Rob is just the coach. He's not up until he was appointed, I think it would have surprised a lot of people. It's not like, well, we got this coach, this name. This is Rob Walter, and maybe it's just Tom and it's just Wandile Guabu. And maybe they had to work together to their strengths to get the best out of a team, to create something, and there's a lot to be said about that. There's a lot to be said about a coaching staff that could potentially say be doing something like that. Obviously, again, we don't know. And that might just be the South African way. That might just be what we've been speaking about, right? That excellence can come from anywhere, right? It can come from any place. And it's easy to say, oh, well, and I think we've had sort of behind the scenes conversations about these. Well, how does a Tom get employed? It sounds very wishy-washy. It sounds very much like a rush job. But maybe he brings something there that they need, right? Maybe a Rob is the ultimate guy because he is maybe behind the scenes soft-spoken. We've critiqued that a little bit. Maybe he's letting the players shine a bit more because he's just Rob Walter. He's not. I'm struggling to find a name of a coach that, because I don't think it's a good thing, but a coach that we perceive as like, whoa, we've got this coach. He's our savior. He's going to save everything. And so maybe because the coaching staff has to work like that and players get to see like something like that, they could start working like that. And if that becomes the language, then we see some good things happening, and that's ultimately, that's what we've been speaking about to a certain extent, sorry, that the excellence can come from anywhere. So how does that sort of look? If I rewind back into some of our conversations, how does that look, say, for that teacher in Etwatwa, that has no cricket at her school? What does that say about a white business in that area, potentially, right? Are we getting together and are we saying, hey, let's solve some problems here and let's take the best of what we have and let's start selling an idea and we start actually making it about the cricket, not about the politics and the drama and the haves and the have-nots and all these things. Let's just make it about the cricket. If it's about the cricket at the end of the day, then that can succeed because cricket's just a game that we can play. Cricket's not difficult to solve problems for. And so maybe that's the lesson that we can take from this to a certain extent. Make it about the right thing, focus on the right things, get the best out of every individual, let everybody feel like they're contributing. And that's that's magic sauce right there,
Yeah, the thing that pops up in my mind consistently is the fact that everyone has different paths and there's no one that's prescribed, like a carbon copy of how it needs to be. So if in this case we had to wait for so long to actually get over the line in this type of thing, but it comes in a very haphazard fashion. But we get the cup with having not addressed some of our major issues. We actually forgoed some of those things and allowed just to go for something as superficial as just a win, right? But that allows us to then, after the superficiality, we then delve deeper. But we need to make sure that if we were to have won it and bring this cup back as an example, that there's a solid foundation that we can use this cup to be placed on, right? That the things that we're going to do with it is actually going to be driving deeper and having an impact further. So if you think about it, like I've heard certain people speak about wanting to cheer Afghanistan's success as an example. However, they highlighted the fact that there's certain things inside their country, some discrimination and whatever. So it's difficult for them to actually applaud and be encouraged by the success. So now they're bringing things that are not related to the game, but they're bringing it in as a factor. And it is there. It's definitely an issue. But now the team has succeeded. And so therefore these things are brought to light. You know what I mean?
mm,
And this is supposedly their kryptonite. So their success has highlighted some of their flaws in a way,
mm,
right? And they're still to play. So if they even progress even further, it's going to highlight it even further. Landing up
mm,
in the semi, landing up in the final, it's going to make this stuff even more pronounced, which means the eyes of the world and the attention of all their frailties is going to be exposed because of their success.
mm,
So what happens if we get successful? What is going to be exposed? That's the question marks. And are we capable and ready enough to deal with those things that we already have been exposing? But we were saying we first need to have the win first. But if the win is guaranteed or it's done, then all we're left with is those things. So let's
mm,
get ready to address it either way, whether
mm,
we bomb out in the next game on Thursday or whether we bomb out on Saturday in the final or just take it. Let's get ready to go and deal with the stuff like we did this talking about lifting the covers. Why are we lifting the covers? We didn't try to get away from the fact. I tried to force and say, no, the chokers, they're definitely going to choke. We weren't saying that. We were
mm,
saying we're seeing a few flaws. Choking has been an issue of the past. We see a few flaws of where they're going to be potentially dropping the ball again and coming short as chokers. But
mm,
if the choking thing is resolved, right, hooray for them. But there's still other things under the covers that we need to attend with. So we're
mm,
just using this conversation to say there are a lot of things at play. Like cricket, there are many variables, and we need to address the right thing at the right time, as you said,
mm,
and make sure that we are capacitated and ready to go with it together.
mm,
If we're going to find unity and sense of belonging and cohesion and collaboration and all those co-creation type of approaches, then let's do the next step of this thing together. Because
mm,
our kryptonite, like we're talking about Afghanistan, their kryptonite is this thing that's happening back home. If you think about it, I'm just going to touch on a few others. If you think about ours, again, I'm saying casual commentary here now, right? This is our bride talk, so it's not real evidence. But if you think about the West Indies and the success of the 80s, the 1980s team that was hugely successful, they were driven by a deep, deep cause. And that proved to be their pathway towards glory and success for a sustained period. Now, as evolution happens within the country, we understand the different disparities within the different islands. So they kind of makeshift, make believe type of unified West Indies banner with different islands, right? But they had a strong component of trying to unify, rally behind our team. It was being a big, people started to feel that energy. However, where the game is at, the authenticity or the disingenuous nature of the West Indies players are, for the most part, since the 80s, since they lost that kind of playing for this deeper cause, most of their players have jumped onto the T20 bandwagon and become mercenaries. They went after the money making aspect. So these guys coming together are basically mercenaries who are all over the world, cashing in, and now they're trying to come together as a collective and saying, no, 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 we're actually here to play for you, that sort of thing.
mm,
How genuine is that? Is that the true spirited way, or are they lying to themselves? That sort of things. So
mm,
when they play yesterday, they don't play like a unified bunch. It seems like what pathetic performance is that from them from time to time? Yes, it was difficult, but you can see in terms of it didn't look as sharp as our fielding, as an example, or
mm,
generally a team that switched on. So for me, that kind of is their kryptonite in that moment where it backfires, right? So every team has its thing. The Australians have their kryptonite is being champions, successfully winning after winning after winning after winning. And then what happens? Bolstered ego, and then they start doing scratching of the ball, win at all costs, because they're so conditioned to winning, and then they lose themselves from a character point of view. So their kryptonite comes through, then they fold and they lose their first game ever against Afghanistan. They should have lost in the World Cup, by the way, the 50 over, with the exception of the 200 scored by Maxwell, right? But that there is their kryptonite. Their success has actually exposed certain flaws in the ego, right?
mm,
So you can use team after team after team. So the question mark is, what is our kryptonite? And are we prepared to actually say, this is an area of weakness? And once we've addressed one or two other elements, we can therefore take hold of this and collectively find resolution for this and move
mm,
forward. I mean, you can think about other teams like not India. India is a fascinating one. India's got all the money in the world. They should be the best in the world. They should be winning it because they've got the best league in the world. right?
Mm.
But they're not winning necessarily this tournament. They didn't win it for the past few years, right? They only won the 2007 one, I think it is, right? If I'm correct. So for me, that's a fascinating role pass. So their kryptonite is all the money, but have they really deeply connected with the meaning to play for India? Because they've got this bravado about them, but they lost it. England, in my view, these are all assumptions, by the way, of my own perspectives. England are the originators of the game, not necessarily T20, but they feel like they have a sense of ownership, a sense of control of the game, knowing how the game is to, and their own kryptonite is to kind of think they know everything about the game, and therefore they critique themselves into death. They sabotage their own successes. They know the most, and therefore they know the least at the same time, and it just implodes at times. So they're their own worst enemy for the most part. So it's like that consistently. We just got to identify what is our kryptonite, what is something that we're saying is our strength, but it actually comes back and grabs us as an Achilles heel in a way. And that's the conundrum. It takes us down. And ultimately, that's the thing that we have to contend with, in a sense, as we move forward from here with this campaign. We've already kind of won partial victory. So it opens our eyes. This is why we did the lifting covers, so that we can have these deeper conversations together, so that we can move all of us forward in a positive way.
Yeah, I agree. I think England started T20 cricket, though.
Oh, have they? Yes.
I think they did. I think the first games was played there, and then India took it and they ran it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It is interesting, and I share sort of my ideas around all those different teams in a similar way to you. I'd say. Pakistan, maybe you didn't mention, but they're a team I often think about is super talented. Like similar to South Africa, right? Just some of the best talent in the world. And they just seem to not have their stuff together at all. So hot and cold, right? That's their story. Absolute brilliant on one day, absolute shocking, like almost like worst of the worst on the next.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to hear Gary Kirsten's comments on that. He's like, this is the worst team he's ever been in. Like, they don't have each other's backs. They don't support each other. It's just me, you know? And I think that's the disease of the modern game to a certain extent. And I think we've sort of spoken a little bit about that in our conversations, is that the whole idea of the individual, you know? And cricket's a team game, and how these tournaments that's around the world are devoid of that, because there is no real identity or brand associated with a team. You know, you become like cattle to a certain extent. You get paid to do a job, and you better do your job and move on, right? Win us a trophy, or, you know, at least go out there and perform. If you don't, then we pick somebody else and on you go. And so I think the challenge of coaches in those spaces are to create meaningfulness in a short space of time. Because squads also change fairly frequently. They change year in, year out. That's simply one thing you hear about this Proteas team. They'd say things like, we've played together quite a lot, which teams of the past have also said, right? But I think this team has realized in some way, they've realized that it's not just about the individuals in the team, that we look and say, oh, we've got job colors, we should win, you know? That whole idea of where it's anybody, if it's your day, you know, we're all going to have our moments. And if it's your day, then that's on you. You carry others' load for today, you know. And so I think that's a huge thing, you know. I think that's a huge thing that they've realized and achieved and is showing. And you see the benefit of that, right? No superstar performances really, other than Quinton, maybe a bit. Andrich Nortje maybe a bit on that New York wicket. But other than that, you know, bowlers have chipped in. Keshav last game, Shamsi this game. Shamsi was hit the previous game. So I certainly agree with, you know, that the team is together there, and that we've got to build on this, right? And we've got to find what is our kryptonite, and find the answers and the solutions to that, and move forward in that way. Because then I think we build a solid foundation, a new foundation. Maybe we need to win this cup to hit that reset and say, right, but this is where we're going. I'm just wondering who's smart enough, and I don't know if smart's the right word, right? Let's do a double take on that. I wonder if CSA is prepared for that, right? I wonder if they are prepared for the idea of finally getting over this hurdle and how they're going to play that out. If they're preparing for that or not, don't know.
I think there could be an element of being too short-sighted, making it solely about the physical cup. I think there's already a recipe, a script somewhat, that they've showed us how to go about doing it. It's a matter of dismantling this particular, excessive hierarchical type of emphasis on individual brilliance and all those sorts of things, and allowing teaming to come together. So as you said, everyone chips in, and this unique kind of contribution from everyone on the floor, instead of making one more special than the next. When you copy that and you take that throughout your systems, then automatically it starts having, we've actually accomplished something there, and let's go and mimic that everywhere else towards the 2027. Hopefully we get the cup raised in South Africa, and the systems below it's unified. And if you're not allowing that sort of expression to unfold from this as is, not the semifinal, not the final, as is, if you're not preparing to do that, then this would have been a waste. This would be an empty. You're going to relegate it to nothing, and it's going to be a cheap, 7 out of 7. Then these individual stars, or not stars, but these individual role players here, right? They're going to walk away and put their names and hands up towards other campaigns, and then just be mercenaries going for their own sense of cause, including the coaching staff. Would say I was part of that successful team that won 7 out of 7. And we came unstuck in the semifinal or the final, or whatever it was, right? They came unstuck, but we've achieved something and we know what we can do, and we want to mimic this year. You know what I mean? They put their hands up for other gigs. But the point is, we need to be able to take that and allow it to be a same form expression elsewhere, contextualized in different spaces throughout South Africa spaces. Because if we're not doing that, then they're not statesmen. They're not people that are playing for the country, inspiring, uniting. They're not doing that. Then they're just purely playing for the win, and the win is going to be forgotten. It's almost like newspaper. You put it in the bird's cage and you forget about it, because today's news, yesterday is in the bird cage. That sort of.
Yeah. Russell, I think that's a great place to finish this conversation, eh? Yeah. It feels good to have a different type of conversation. At the same point in time, still being aware of the pitfalls, if that makes sense. I think at times people who've maybe listened could very easily say, we're just critical of the system. We're just critical. We're just trying to find the faults, right? And I don't think that's our intention. It wasn't the intention from the get-go. It was to lift the covers. There's monsters under the covers. And unless we speak about the monsters, we're not going to move anything forward. And I think, should the team go on to win this thing, there's an opportunity to rip the covers completely off and say, right, there is no more cover. There is no more cover. Let's go, and I think then it was not just a success on the field, but it can definitely be a success off the field too. Your legacy could be we've won a trophy and we did nothing with it. That could be the legacy, or it could be we won a trophy and we changed the world. We changed the society, we changed the new. And it doesn't have to be that, right? It doesn't have to be that big and that significant. But it would be so fruitless if it's just we won a trophy versus we won a trophy and we did something with that, and we made a shift, a lasting change in some way. My head personally always goes to the biggest, the grandest, the greatest, right? Change the whole country, change everything, right? Maybe it's not that. Maybe all they change is the conversation on the couch. Then even that was a success, Yeah.
The main thing sometimes that people get scared about when lifting the covers is, like you're saying, what's underneath it, right? But unless you pulled a Band-Aid back, unless you pulled something that's been covered or being hidden, it's the concept of unfiltered transparency, because now everything becomes transparent for everyone to see. And what that does is it leads towards starting of trust. Distrust and mistrust gets dismantled, and trust becomes the bedrock of what we can build. And then your grander things you're talking about can follow.
Yeah. Brilliant. Awesome. I enjoyed this. I'll see you in the next one.
Cheers, cheers. Good
Cool,
times.
cheers.